Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. I bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah and Allah alone. And I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the one through whom the Quran was revealed over 14 centuries ago, is his last divinely sent messenger and the seal of the prophethood within a prophetic brotherhood that began with Adam and ends with Muhammad. We want to welcome our friends and guests in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of a conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. The late Dr. Alfred M. Lilienthal, a Jewish lawyer and American diplomat, noted many years ago, quote, "Zionism is not Judaism, and Judaism is not Zionism. And to be anti-Zionist is in no way to be anti-Semitic. Zionism is a political movement devoted to the founding and advancement of the state of Israel, politically, diplomatically, financially, and otherwise. On the other hand, Judaism is a religious faith, a relationship between man and God, requiring no political loyalty to any country. Too often, religion and nationalism have become mixed up," end quote. Rarely do we hear such candor regarding the distinction between Judaism and Zionism from a prominent member of the Jewish community. Today, by the grace of Allah, we have an opportunity to hear more. Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss is an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, a spokesman for Neturei Karta International, Jews United Against Zionism. He travels worldwide to explain that not only is the state of Israel a violation of international law, but that the whole Zionist ideology is built on a rebellion against the Almighty. He is constantly clarifying the difference between Judaism and Zionism. To wit, Zionism is a transformation of Judaism from a religion to nationalism. Rabbi Weiss frequently attends international pro-Palestinian conferences. He meets with high-ranking Muslim and Arab dignitaries, and he has a history of building bridges between Arab and Jewish communities in an effort to restore the historic and harmonic coexistence between Arabs and Jews throughout the Muslim world. He stresses always that the traditional pious Jews who observe the teachings of the Torah, the people of the book, take no part in the oppression against the Palestinian people. On the contrary, they oppose it in the strongest terms and constantly pray for the speedy and peaceful dismantling of the state of Israel, with the expectation that once this happens, we all, once again, will be able to live in peace and harmony. Rabbi Weiss visited Gaza, Turkey, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Iran, Yemen, Qatar, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Africa, all the major European countries, and more, to participate in conferences, lecturing in universities, speaking for the masses, and personally meeting with many religious and governmental leaders. He spoke at the UN Conference on Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001. He visited Gaza in July and December of 2009 as part of an aid convoy to the suffering Palestinians. Neturei Karta International is an apolitical religious organization committed to publicizing the viewpoint of the masses of anti-Zionist Orthodox Jews worldwide, who strongly oppose the state of Israel and its actions. The work of NKI is well known and respected worldwide. And with this, I would like to welcome to today's program, Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss.
Assalamu alaikum. It's an honor and a privilege. I'm humbled by your most eloquent presentation.
MashaAllah.
I'm, as I always like to say, I'm simply a messenger. I'm a messenger of the Jewish people around the world who are true to the Torah, to our covenant, the Jewish religion that we've made with the Almighty. Firstly, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth and His wisdom, that I may convey His message and so bring peace to the world and sanctify His name. And assalamu alaikum to all the people who must be august and distinguished people to watch your program, and to you, of course, and your representation, your presentation of who you are doesn't really need for me to sort of to speak about, because you are also a person who is out there for so many years, standing up for the downtrodden, and where there's an opportunity to be able to broadcast to the world suffering of people who other people shun, and people who are afraid to speak up for. You are there. I've seen you so many times in the hot, the sun beat, and it was just impossible to stand up. So you are standing there on the streets for people who are arrested, people who are suffering really for totally false charges and things like that. You are there. So God bless and give you the power, and you should be able to accomplish continually. It's an honor to be on your program.
I mean, Rabbi Weiss, how long have we known each other? Would you estimate?
It's many years.
It's been a good number of years. Yes.
Yeah.
I was pondering that question last night, and the best I could come up with was, I would say, approximately 20 years. Certainly going back as far as the murder of that exceptional young American woman, Rachel Corrie, and then she was murdered by the IDF soldier in March of 2003. Yeah, so at least that far back, and that's almost 20 years.
Yeah, yes.
But to begin with, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Well, I thank God. I had that COVID. So I really 19 this. So it was. But thank God, God gave me it was a resuscitation. I was able to come back to my health with God's help. I hope to 120, and that we hope to be able to continually spread the word of the Almighty, and He wants us to do. I hope we should be able to continually do that. And I always pray a person has to say that he's fearful, that God forbid, a person has to be fearful that he won't be able to stand up to different pressures and things like that. I pray to God that we should be able to stand up there, and ultimately we pray that the Almighty should reveal His glory, where all humanity will serve God soon in our days, and all these problems will fall away, the suffering of humanity, so we won't have the job of having to go out and speak up.
Yes, clearly, Rabbi Weiss, there is more for you to do. I'm so glad that, given the fact that you were visited by this this pandemic that has gripped the entire globe, that you were able to come out of it still with us, and with your health apparently appearing to be intact by the grace of Almighty God. It's really a blessing, and again, clearly you you have more to do on this side of existence, and we pray to Allah that that you are successful in the very courageous work that you and other members of Neturei Karta have been known for so many years. Out of curiosity, I decided to check out what Wikipedia has to say about you.
Yeah.
Let me say, I wasn't surprised at what I found, because when it comes to controversial, hot-button political issues, Wikipedia is not always a reliable source. In fact, rarely are they a reliable source when it comes to certain issues for accurate information. So I wasn't surprised what the hit job that I found on Wikipedia concerning you, Rabbi Weiss.
Yes.
Among other things, quote, and this is going to lead to the first question of our conversation. He represents fewer than 500 people. Now, I know better than that. He represents fewer than 500 people. And Neturei Karta's extreme views, created around 100 years ago, are rejected by the vast majority of Orthodox Jews worldwide. In another place it reads, quote, Weiss was criticized in 2006 for his participation in the International Conference to Review the Global Vision of the Holocaust, widely considered to be an event promoting Holocaust denial internationally, end quote. And then in yet another response that, that it incorporated a very unfair criticism. And as a prelude to today's program, last night I decided to share with my Facebook friends the very impressive speech of Rabbi Aaron Cohen from that 2006 international conference held in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Rabbi Cohen, he challenged anyone who would deny that a Holocaust took place. He challenged anyone who would deny that a Holocaust took place, and he also, and this was very important, he also made it very clear that Jews had no right to use the Holocaust as an excuse to oppress another people. And this is something, of course, that went unsaid in the Wikipedia profile on you. And then again, lastly, in your profile, there is a paragraph that reads, in 2001, he attended, referencing you, the UN organized World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, as part of the Islamic Human Rights Commission delegation. During the conference, US and Israeli delegates walked out in protest for the singling out of Israel, end quote. Now, this brings me to the first question. Given the fact that most of the public criticism leveled against Neturei Karta revolves around your organization's position on Judaism versus Zionism, I think this would be a good starting point for us in today's conversation. When did Neturei Karta come into existence, and what is the distinction between Judaism and Zionism, and why is this important?
Yeah, so with the help of the Almighty, like you said, everything, we say that there's a saying amongst our holy rabbis that falsehood has to take a grain of truth, or else it won't have the feet to stand on, because a falsehood doesn't have feet to stand on. So they take a grain of truth from everything, and then they just incorporate their falsehood that they're trying to bring to the front, and that's the way they try to con people into believing that. So in everything that you mentioned, there were issues of truth. There was some, but they incorporated falsehood. The people, the Jewish people, as people well know, are more than 500 people of Jewish people. And what does Judaism mean? Judaism is a religion to be subservient to God. It's 3,000 years that we stood on Mount Sinai around 3,000 years, and we accepted the covenant to be subservient to the Almighty and accept the teachings of the Almighty. This issue, what it means is that we must accept every word of the Torah, and it hasn't changed. It's a godly given Torah, so therefore it's something above time and space, and therefore the Torah does not change. We have to throughout the generations, we attempt and we do see that our lives should be acceptable, go according to the words of the Torah. And God, who is above time, and he wrote the Torah, gave us the Torah. It's like a blueprint for the world, and it's no difference whether it was given on Mount Sinai when people didn't have cars, automobiles, or computers, to today. So that is a fact that hasn't changed, and we have to relate to that and accept the words of the Torah in every changing generation. It doesn't really matter what time of history it is. So this is basically what Judaism meant: to be subservient to God, to accept the Torah. The concept of Zionism, to create a state, is a so-called Jewish state. This is a matter of a little over 150 years, 130, 150 years old, and therefore it is a relatively new concept. Again, Judaism is subservience to God. It's a spirituality. Zionism is a transformation, as you eloquently said earlier, to nationalism, to a concept of being loyal to a goal, a material goal of having a piece of land and so forth. This Judaism can't be changed by any Jew whatsoever. I know I was a little, I elaborated a lot on that. But this is the facts of Judaism. Therefore, we went through many times in our history, very trying times, and times that people thought that, let's say, when they were being by the Crusades or the Inquisition, that they said it was times that was called the Golden Age of Judaism, where there was some very rich communities, and they could have afforded to buy a piece of land. And they asked the rabbis, should we buy a piece of land? Should we do something to create our own safe haven or so forth? And the rabbi said that is expressly forbidden in the Torah. Have patience. God is all compassionate. He sees every person suffering. When the time will come that we should leave exile, then he will take us out. But till that day comes, we are forbidden to try to create even 1 inch of Jewish sovereignty. Now, I left out an important issue. We accepted the rule of the Almighty this 3,000 years ago, the Torah, which Moses brought down from Mount Sinai for us. It said that if we will go that God will take us into the Holy Land, and we were required to build a temple, and this was the will of the Almighty. We followed the will. It happened through miraculous happenings. They walked around the walls of Jericho. It sunk in. It was a miraculous happening. And we went in, but God stipulated that we have to be in a high level of holiness. If not, we will be rejected from the land. It says that many times in the Torah, that it's a holy land we rejected. The time came 2,000 years ago. This is around 1,000 years after we accepted the Torah, around 1,000 years after we went into the Holy Land, and we were sent into exile with the destruction of the temples, King Solomon's temple and the second temple, which happened afterwards. We were sent into exile. This is 2,000 years. We went through many trials and tribulations, but the Jewish people accepted that everything that happens is from God, and it was God's decree to go into exile, and therefore we are under the rules of God, of the Torah. It never changes. That is, there's 3 oaths of God at the time. 1, not to return en masse, in large numbers, to the Holy Land. Secondly, not to rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. And thirdly, not to make any attempt to end exile. In other words, not to return en masse to the Holy Land, not to rebel against the nation or make any attempts to leave exile. The Jews, as I say, accepted this. We went through many throughout the 2,000 years. Anybody who goes through Europe, travels through Spain, Italy, and you will find that, and even England, York. New York is named after York, a person called York. There's a famous center in York where there's a hill where there was a palace, there was a fortress where Jews were burnt. The whole community, they relied on the police over there, the government, and they were surrounded by people who wanted them to forcefully convert them out of Judaism. They refused. They went up there, and some of them took their own lives, many of them, because they were afraid they would be forced to convert, and then they were burnt alive over there. But many of them took their own lives. I'm talking, and there's a big plaque in York. Go to New York. New York has it named after it. There's a big plaque on the bottom of the hill. It's a famous place. So this was already in England. This is 600 years or something. Maybe I'm making a mistake how many years ago, but it's way back in our history. At the same time, the Jewish, and that could go through in Spain and Italy, you go from city to city, where Jews were sent into exile, or there was that they were burnt at the stake if they refused to convert. Yet Jews, again, throughout the words of our teachings, who's the leaders of the community of Judaism? It's the rabbis, understandably, because it's a religion. And the rabbis, all of them said in one voice, we are forbidden to try to solve our problem by creating our own Jewish state, and Jews respected that. We know that the only way that we will be protected by God is we'll follow God's will, and that is to be subservient, and then God promises to protect us, and we love God. We accept that he's compassionate. We don't know all his reasons for what he does things, so that's the way it is. We accept it. Now, my grandparents, which I was born like around 10 years after the Second World War, after what people call the Holocaust. And where there was maybe a lot more than 6 million people, because I was in the Iran conference that we have to talk about, and there was many historians who say, for instance, and there was many that were not counted that came from Russia who were murdered by the Nazis when they went, and so whatever the issue is, but let's say 6 million Jews were killed. My grandparents were murdered in Auschwitz. The majority of my mother's family, she should have long, healthy years, were in Poland, and my father's family were from Hungary. They were murdered. My father's brother was my personal teacher. He had a wife and 5 children who were murdered. You can go to his tombstone here in New Jersey, and where it says the names of his children and his wife who were murdered. And I could go on and on. Also, my father escaped when the Nazis came to Hungary, and so our community, where I live, the community are people who are immigrants who survived almost entirely, who escaped from the Holocaust. So it's in our bones. This is something that we live and breathe. Our relatives, all the people in our communities, many of them had numbers tattooed into their hands because they were like prison. And prison is in the concentration camps where they were known by their numbers. That's all, like cattle. So just that issue. But basically, that's a side issue. But still in all, the point was that none of our rabbis, none of the leaders throughout the generations, we went through so many trials and tribulations, none of them said that the solution will be to try to revolt against God's commands or outsmart God by making our own country, because it's God's world. He protects us. His concepts, we don't know why he has reasons for different things. We have to be introspective and try to understand why he brings things happen, why the Holocaust and so forth. But we are not embittered. We do not question the hand of God. And if he says that it's forbidden, that since we're in exile, we are forbidden to return and make our own state, we accept that lovingly and know that that will never be the solution to fight God. It's ridiculous. We're breathing air. COVID-19 showed that people, the doctors, everybody, they don't understand how we breathe. They can't figure this whole issue out. But it's God who makes us our bodies, the DNA, work like clockwork, in, out, out. You're breathing. It's all in the hands of God. And God says to us that the solution is to serve him and to be loyal to him, and not to try to take a gun in our hands and say, we'll protect ourselves. The ones who do come along with this is because it's prefaced with that they scorn God, that they don't accept the words of God, that they rebel against God and remove God from the equation. And they come along, these Jews who come from Jewish parents, maybe some of them or a lot of them, but they simply they threw that out. They threw out the Torah and they say, we don't accept the words of God. Our only solution, where was God? And they spew heresy, and they say, where was God by our suffering? As if while they're saying this, they're breathing, they're not imploding, it's because of God. But anyway, so that's what they're doing. So they said that the solution is to take a gun in our hands and create a state. And the Torah, as I said, clearly states that we are expressly forbidden to make our own entity, our own nationalist home. Now, not only that, but of course, by going and taking the homes away from others, by stealing and killing, that's part of the basics of the Torah. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. That said, the rabbis around the world, the hundreds of thousands of Jews who are living around the world, who are still following the words of the Torah, who are true to the words of the Torah from before the Holocaust or after the Holocaust, all stood in one, because Zionism, we have to make clear, didn't happen because of the Holocaust. Zionism was like 50 years before the Holocaust came, and they decided that their way is to make their own national home. And the rabbis at the time, it was in Jerusalem, for instance, there was Rabbi Sonnenfeld of blessed memory. He stood up, he met with the king of Transjordan to let them know, to let the world know that we refuse to in any manner accept this concept of trying to confiscate or take the land away from the Palestinian people to create a homeland. And his voice was around the world. We put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out, which is a 130-year record of religious Jewish opposition to Zionism. Now, this is something which is a compilation of the rabbis from Jerusalem, from around the world, from every country around the world, the greatest leaders, besides the hundreds of thousands of others. One who's very famous, who was a codifier of Jewish law, was Rabbi Yisroel Meir HaKohen. He's a very famous rabbi, which everybody lives and breathes by his writings of the Jewish laws. And he writes, I'll just quote one sentence, he says, the Zionists are dead limbs of our people, which causes the entire body to rot. This is just one quote of these from around the world, like I say, from Hungary, from Poland, from Russia, from all over the world, from Jerusalem, from the Middle East, Iraq, Iran. The rabbis stood in one voice against them. And I'm just going to skip over to the 1947, when they were ready to create the state of Israel, because the Zionists had a lot of power and a lot of connections with the people from Britain. So they were pushing this concept of making a state of Israel. Now, so at that time, Rabbi Sonnenfeld had passed away. The chief rabbi was Rabbi Dushinsky. The pictures are not so great, but you can go to mkusa.org, our site, and you'll be able to see this. This Rabbi Dushinsky became the chief rabbi of Palestine. Now, I must state that when we're speaking about, let's say, the Israeli rabbinate, they present themselves as the Jewish rabbinate or something, as if they represent all Jews. But the fact is that there is a separate entity entirely. It's called the Eid HaCharedis, the God-fearing community with their rabbinate, and their rabbinate with the chief rabbi. There was Rabbi Sonnenfeld in the 1920s, and then this is before the state of Israel, obviously. And there was when he passed away, there was Rabbi Dushinsky. He was the chief rabbi of the Eid HaCharedis and the Turikart at the time, and he was the chief rabbi, and he came along. He represented the voice of Jews who are true to Judaism, who are not rebels against God. And he met with the delegation. He met with the delegation of the United Nations, because the United Nations at that time was a fresh organization. They decided to come and feel out what the opinion is of the citizens, of the people, indigenous population who are living in Palestine. And he went and he said to the United Nations, the representative said, I'm quoting him, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. Again, I have to restate that. We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This is a declaration before the United Nations, July 16th, 1947. The State of Israel was ratified by the United Nations in 1948. That means before it was created, he pleaded with the United Nations. It's in their records. This is from their records. Now, you mentioned that in the Wikipedia, of course, which is full of falsehoods. But here, this is a picture. Again, my pictures are not that good, but you can see this is over 100,000 people welcoming welcoming anti-Zionist rabbi to Jerusalem, and this is in 2013. There's constantly different ones, but we have pictures when these are people who are for just to welcome a rabbi who came from New York to give them a little support in the streets of Jerusalem. I don't think this looks like 5,000 people, but you know, whatever. This is in Washington, D.C. when Netanyahu came to visit with the president, and here you have tens of thousands of people going and demonstrating in front of the White House. I mean, we have we have thousands of pictures of every year demonstrations. I just have some collections I have that I could show you. But the point is, when the Rabbi Dushinsky passed away, we had over 100,000 people in the streets of Jerusalem to welcome the new chief rabbi. His name was Rabbi Weiss. Then he passed away. There's another Rabbi Weiss, actually, is the chief rabbi there. Both of them are not my relatives, except distant from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but not a close relative, and they're chief rabbis. In other words, there's a dual rabbinate in the Holy Land. There's the Israeli rabbinate that everybody knows about, and that chief rabbi, and everybody thinks that they represent both the Jewish communities in Palestine, or what they would like to call Israel, and the Jewish religion. It's a given, and whatever they say a statement, their chief rabbi, it's given as if that would be the words, God forbid, of God. But the truth is, it's all a farce. It's a window dressing for this occupation that's totally illegitimate and illegal. And the Jewish people who are true to the Torah, these Jews of our history, the ones who gave their lives for the Torah, my grandparents, and the generations, we never have a gap in our history of being loyal to the Torah until today. And from then we stood, as in the 1920s when the chief rabbi Sonnenfeld met with the king of Transjordan, or Rabbi Dushinsky spoke to the United Nations. We stood in one voice. No, we refuse to accept this occupation, the creation of a so-called Jewish state, the state of Israel. It's totally unacceptable, against a direct rebellion against these three oaths of God: not to return en masse, not to rebel against nations, the Palestinian people, and not to make an attempt to leave exile. They call themselves the beginning of redemption. Now, we have
Rabbi Weiss, wait, let me ask you this. Were most of the founders of Zionism practicing Jews?
And in fact, just the opposite. They were almost entirely. The movement of Zionism was started by. We could start by Theodor Herzl, and I have many of his quotes. But I would just like to show just a picture to give you an idea. I'll just bear with me half a second. Okay. We have well, this is not such a clear picture, but I'll show you this picture here. This is a picture of David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, reading the Declaration of Independence in 1948 in Independence Hall. Now, just get a picture of these are the representatives of the Zionist state, and look at them. If you see one of them covering the head, as a Jew is required to do. I'm not even talking about a beard or payas like we go or something. Now, and you look at the gatherings that we have of our rabbis, and you'll see a picture of what a rabbi looks like, and I'll show you a picture. Go to outside of gatherings of what a Jewish person who's representing Judaism, and our Jewish gatherings, what they look like, how the Jews look like. So this is such a farce. It's so comical if it wouldn't be so tragic. You know, so no, then they're not religious Jews. Their issue is a direct transformation from Judaism as subservience to God into a nationalism. We have a book we put out called Traditional Torah Opposition to Zionism. And there we have a compilation of many documents and quotes of the Zionists, also documents of the Zionists. And I would just like to quote Theodor Herzl, who was in his own diary that he was the father, of course, of Zionism. And he wrote, "The way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism is to speak to the head priest of Vienna, to get an appointment with the Pope, to make a mass conversion of all the Jews of Austria to Catholicism. He should make an appointment." Now, mind you, this was this is way before the state of Israel, way before the Holocaust, right? And he still said that the way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism is to speak to the head priest of Vienna, to get an appointment with the Pope, to make a mass conversion of all Jews of Austria to Catholicism. It should be done on a Sunday in the middle of the day with music and pride publicly. We are the last generation that held on to the faith of our forefathers. The conversion would be in St. Stephen's Cathedral. This is a quote from his own book. Wait, I'll just put a little icing on the cake. So there was, let's say, in 19, right? Again, the state was created, it was ratified in 1948. But at the beginning, when they started moving this movement of Zionism and going up to the Holy Land to create their rebellion against God and their Nakba, their tragedy, their destruction of the Palestinian people there. Vladimir Jabotinsky was the founder of revisionist Zionism, wrote, and he wrote this openly in called Haaretz newspaper, which still goes on, the Haaretz today in the Holy Land. And it says in an article called from quoting "Outside the Encampment," he wrote like this. Unabashedly, he wrote, "In the national home, we will announce that those Jews who have on themselves the rust of exile and they refuse to shave off their beards and earlocks, earlocks, will be second-class citizens and not have a right to vote." Imagine that. They're creating a Jewish state, supposedly because they're standing up to save the Jews from anti-Semitism. They're the heroes and the ones who finally stood up. And he's creating a state, and he says his idea of Theodor Herzl is to have all Jews convert out of the religion. And Jabotinsky says, well, at least one thing will make sure they shouldn't have beards and payas, and earlocks. They will call us. I mean, let's try to get our heads around this. Minds around what's going on here. Is this Judaism again? Let's not remember what is Judaism. It's a religion. It's not it's not like you say there's Uganda, there's South Africa, there's United States, Canada, and who's representing Canada is who's representing Judaism, a religion. And these people are coming, and they have the audacity, the sheer hubris to come up and say that they're representing Judaism, and they add to their, of course, a Star of David, who David wrote the Psalms, who was subservient to God, and they add the Star of David and the menorah and all these symbols, and they make a rabbinate in order to be able to give it a aura, a facade of legitimacy, and to intimidate that if somebody dares to speak up against their occupation, their crime, of killing, stealing the homes of the Palestinians, and mind you, what they do to the religious Jews, which is a whole other issue. But in order to just give this an aura of some type of legitimacy, and godliness, they made a rabbinate, and they call it a Jewish state. And Netanyahu insists that it should be called a Jewish state. And if you oppose them, you're not anti-Israel or let's say, if you'd be anti-Canada or anti-a-country, you are anti-Jewish. They insist that those two issues should be incorporated. And if you speak up against the state of Israel, you are anti-Semite, and you are speaking against Judaism. End of statement. End period. That's the way they do it. They won't tell you that they have mandatory army service, to serve in their military, and they arrest boys and girls. They force them into prisons, not to go prison outfits, mind you, but they put them into their army uniforms. This girl is carrying a psalm with her. She's saying a prayer. She's crying because she was arrested. They take all the Jewish youth. Because from the age of 17 on, it's mandatory service, boys and girls in the Israeli army. and they refuse. The religious community refuses to serve in the army. We're not going to stand and kill people and oppress people and steal the land, while the Torah tells us thou shalt not steal, and we've been giving our lives for 3,000 years for this to serve God, and now we're not going to stand up and just stand in the Israeli army. So they get brutally beaten. You have demonstrations in the streets of Jerusalem. I have thousands and thousands of pictures. You can see children. Look at this. These are army dragging children on the streets with the most brutal cruelty. They smash their heads. This is ongoing. Again, go to our site. I can only advise people to go outside. And the world is silent. If this would be done in any country around the world, any country, it would be in front of the United Nations. There would be an emergency meeting. How could this be done? It's anti-Semitism, and they scream anti-Semitism to the world. Yet we have demonstrations. We don't carry guns. Nobody could accuse us of carrying any arms. We go, we make peaceful demonstrations. We stand on the streets and simply and cry. And to the wind, we cry and we plead with the people that let the world hear. We are imprisoned in Palestine. We are imprisoned. Our Jewish boys and girls, brothers and sisters, our rabbis have been assassinated throughout the history of Zionism. From before, maybe the first famous martyr was his name was Dr. Dahan, who was killed in 1924, I believe it was, that he was assassinated. And it's in the books. It's in the Zionist declaration. Here they're spraying it's called stink chemicals that destroy their clothes when the Jews are demonstrating. They're poor communities. They have to buy new clothes after every demonstration, all because it's their ploy that they should silence the Jews. You see women standing there with Palestinian flags. This is in a Jewish neighborhood. You know, this, you can see this is the will of Jews, that they refuse to stand up. When they made the beginning of the Zionism came. So, and then there was Yasser Arafat and stood up to represent his people. It was our rabbis who stood up and said, no, we refuse to accept this concept, this occupation, and we stand together with Palestinians. And we don't accuse the Palestinians of being terrorists. We accuse them of being victims, which is not an accusation, but a heartfelt cry of solidarity and support and hurt and sympathy. And here, this Rabbi Hirsch, he was one of our main voices of being outspoken to the world, the voice of the Jewish community in Palestine. Mind you, he lived in the city of Jerusalem, of Al-Quds. Now, what did the Zionists do? They poured acid in his eyes. He was blind. He was almost blind. He was totally blind. And the second, he was barely able to see, because that's what the Zionists did to him. And nobody talks about this. I could go on and on and on, but just the fact of the matter is, Judaism is religion, subservience to God, and there is no way, shape, or form that we have any will or connection to this occupation. It is totally against what Judaism is, what God wants of us, and the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews in Jerusalem. Now, and occupied Palestine. But I have to add, not only the Jews in Palestine, of course, but if you will go around the world, you will find invariably that in any community, if you go to, of course, to the United States, where it has the second largest Jewish community, you will come to New York, and you will go or to Montreal, Canada, or London in England, you will find that the very religious community is not Zionist. On the contrary, there is not one Israeli flag in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, right across from Manhattan. If I'm sure you've been there, and right across from Manhattan, you'll go through blocks and blocks, and it goes into Bed-Stuy, the Jewish neighborhood from Williamsburg, and stretches and stretches. There is not one single Israeli flag. If you will go to Stanford Hills in London, that's in the center of London, you will find the same thing. There's a mosque, a synagogue, a mosque. They live together in harmony, and there's not an Israeli flag there. Why? Because the more the religious the Jew, the more he knows that the Zionist a mantra, the Zionist con job of trying to incorporate the Judaism into their movement is totally false and unacceptable, and they stand against not the annexation, what's happening today, but the existence, the mere existence of 1 inch, 1 centimeter of Jewish sovereignty in the Holy Land. And we cry, we have our prayers, we cry, we feel the suffering of the Palestinian people who are like brothers and sisters to us. We used to walk on the streets of Jerusalem. We have so many pictures of how we used to stand in the streets of Jerusalem, Jews. I mean, just like, how we lived together. We babysat each other's children constantly. And it was no necessity for any human rights groups to protect us or police, because this is not a religious conflict of Jews against Muslims, Jews against Arabs. It's a conflict of a movement, a mere relatively new political movement called Zionism against godliness, against God, against Jews and Muslims together. It's a movement that has been by the world. Unfortunately, the world doesn't know it and doesn't hear. So we go around and talk, and one day the world will understand.
Rabbi Weiss, wow, time has really flown, brother. We got about 12 minutes left in this broadcast. I have 2 other questions, and I'm going to connect together. On the back of what you just said, about how observant Jews who don't fit into that very corrupt and oppressive paradigm in occupied Palestine, how they are attacked. And of course, we don't see we don't see that. We don't see reports of that here in America, and no doubt in other parts of the world. My question to you is, I know that there are members of, well, I assume there are members of Neturei Karta who reside in occupied Palestine. Is Neturei Karta the only entity that is anti-Zionist in occupied Palestine? Are there other organizations or other groups and communities that have this very visible posture, and are they part of that targeted Jewish community that gets the kind of treatment, that horrific treatment that you just outlined, that we don't hear about over here? That's one question. And then the other question is, I'd like for you, before the program ends, to weigh in with your opinion of what just recently took place, that's been getting a lot of international attention, this so-called accord between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, supposedly brokered by Trump, that from my humble perspective, simply makes official the obvious, what has been taking place all along. But I'd like to have your opinion on that, my friend. First, again, the composition of the Jewish opposition to Zionism in occupied Palestine, and then your view, your opinion of this accord, quote unquote, that just took place.
Yeah, with God's help, we'll have to have more programs about this, because
yes,
we're talking about the state, which is over 70 years, unfortunately, and we're talking about the occupation, which was over 100 years, really, well over 100 years already. So it doesn't do justice, to take it. But I could just say that again, as I think with God's help, try to clarify, the Torah is clearly contradictory, and it's not unacceptable. It's a direct contradiction to Zionism. The Torah is subservience to God. So Judaism and Zionism are diametrically opposite, and it's impossible to merge the two. So therefore, it's not only the Neturei Karta who are observing the Torah, but all the Torah observant Jews, almost in its entirety, you always find the rotten apple, and they were able to find that cook, his name should be obliterated. They took a rabbi. They always able to find a person who's knowledgeable, who is a rotten apple, who became simply spoiled, who became who rotted from inside. Even though he's knowledgeable, knowledge doesn't mean that a person is good. But as a general rule, so the Jews around the world stood in opposition. In total opposition, and that was the Zionists who started joining the Zionist movement were ostracized. It started in Europe, and they were ostracized from the Jewish community entirely. It was almost entirely. There was very, very few who stood and accepted the rabbis who were somehow stood and tried to give them support. Of course, we have to go through the history. When they came up to the Holy Land, they had the backing, unfortunately, of the British government because they were well connected. And I could get into that, but again, because it's such a short time left, there was Chaim Weizmann, and I wish time would allow us, but he said, but he did write. Maybe I'll just say his quote. Chaim Weizmann, when he was discussing the Holocaust, because he lived after he lived at the time when the Nazis were taking over, and he had a meeting in the 30s with the very powerful Zionist organizations. And they discussed if they should use money to try to save the Jews because the writing was on the wall that Jews are being murdered. So this is Chaim Weizmann, the first president of the Zionists of the State of Israel. And he had a meeting again, as I say, with the Zionist leadership. They said, and I'm quoting him, "Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. We want only the best of Jewish youth to come to us. We want only the educated to enter Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture." The educated, he means doctors and lawyers and scientists. Educated as rabbis, he didn't mean that at all. The other Jews, meaning the Jews who are not these scientists and lawyers, will have to stay where they are and face whatever fate awaits them. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. We don't want them pouring into Palestine. We don't want Tel Aviv to become another low-grade ghetto, meaning Jews like me. He didn't want these type of Jews. So these are the pictures of what Zionism was about, a nationalism. Now, of course, later, again, the time doesn't allow, but later then they claimed that when they actually worked, they colluded with the Nazis to get the Jews sent up because they want the Jews to come and create their state. But they didn't want Jews like us, who were against the state, to be there and make them trouble. Basically, every religious Jew, all the religious communities, almost entirety around the world, ostracized and hated and opposed and demonstrated against this concept of Zionism. So Neturei Karta was a name given to the Jews who were very active from the Eid HaCharedis, from the God-fearing community, the rabbinate that I mentioned of Rabbi Dushinsky, Rabbi Sonnenfeld of blessed memory. So they were the voices. Neturei, it's an Aramaic from the Talmud. It means Neturei, protectors, Karta of the city. It was the ones who were very vocal in opposition. But the whole community stood up in opposition. And until today, the Neturei Karta is it's not a card-carrying organization. It's a voice of many people who are very vocal, but there's many different communities and organizations and synagogues and all around the world. Again, the rule is of this: the more the religious, the more they know their religion, the more they are attached to the religion, they stand in opposition to the entity called the State of Israel that is across the board around the world. Their voices aren't heard because of the intimidation, because of the Zionist attacks, brutal attacks on the ones who are very vocal, how they murdered, assassinated our rabbis. They attacked brutally in every shape and form in the Holy Land. Boys and girls who are demonstrating. It's not only Neturei Karta, it's the religious communities are demonstrating there. And the same thing is they can't be so vicious, or at least openly, to the ones of Jewish communities around the world, but they make them many, I can't, the attacks, and maybe you've seen some that happened to us. They actually shoot at people, but that's less. It's done insidiously. It's done secretly. Now we just want to get back to because I'll have to cross on because the time doesn't allow. But we know that being that the Zionists have so much money, they use the best PR firms, and they try to present to the world that the Zionists are the victims, and of course, and they represent the Jewish people who are victims, and they try to incorporate the Holocaust in it, and that the villains are the Palestinian people. And then they try to say that you should help us make peace. We only want peace, and actually Palestine was an empty land. That's another one of their falsehoods. So they tried, and it was empty land, and just the Palestinians are anti-Semitic and they hate the Jews. Which all of these are patently false. It's deplorable. It's unacceptable. It's repulsive. So the Zionists come with this concept, and they try to have the world leaders, whether it's the American world leaders, to support them. And that's how they gain sympathy. Now they're turning to the heads of the Arab countries, whether it's the Arab Emirates or maybe who understood the Palestinian suffering, and they're trying to convince them that it will be good for the Palestinians and for the Jews by somehow giving legitimacy to the state of Israel. They just don't understand that the Zionists just made another leap in the Satans, which they're simply Satan in success in conning another government who used to stand for the Palestinian people, and conning them that they're doing a favor for both the Palestinians and the Jews. We plead with them respectfully, because a Jew has to be respectful and loyal in every country where they reside, and to every leader in every country. We plead with the heads of the Arab Emirates and the other countries, please do not fall prey to Zionists. And on the contrary, you want to help the Jews, which I'm sure they do because they always respect Jewish people, and you want to help the Palestinians. The solution is the removal, God help speedily and peacefully, of the Zionism, of this relatively new interlopers, these people who came from Europe, the Zionists, into Palestine. Remove them, then Jews can live together as we've had for hundreds and hundreds of years, and literally thousands of years we've together. We can, whether it was Iran or Egypt or all over the world, it doesn't matter what type of Muslim. It's not a religious conflict. That is the solution. If they're going to try to live with the Zionists, they're going to find that these are villains, and the end will be it's a rebellion against God, and it will not be successful, will not bring peace. We plead with them. We hope that we should have a free Palestine, a free Palestine. We can give back their rights, the freedom to the Palestinian people, and apologize for what's been done, and we can live together in peace and harmony, and ultimately the revelation of God, all humanity will serve him in peace.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Dovid Weiss. You know, brother, I'm glad. It's good that you are a fast talker. You packed a lot of information into this hour. Well, after my introduction, I guess you had about 45 to 50 minutes. I want to thank you. I want to thank Neturei Karta International for the very courageous, principled, God-fearing stand that you and your community has taken for all of these years. I know it has not been easy. I know it's not it's not easy being having epithets thrown at you like self-hating Jew and what have you, and various other terrible things. I mean, for you to be accused of anti-Semitism, subhanAllah, it shows just how crazy this world and the discourse around issues of truth and justice have become. But I want to thank you. I really, really thank you on behalf of not just myself, but so many others who have seen you, members of your organization, of your movement, present at demonstration after demonstration, present at conferences, even at times when you should have been, within the interfaith delegation, the ones, in my humble opinion, and in the opinion of others, with the lion's share of Jewish discourse at the interfaith conference. Oftentimes, you were kind of saddled to just being seen and not heard. Some of our brethren, when it comes to standing up on courage and principle, we fall short. That's a human frailty. But you all have stood up. I've seen you, and I've been impressed by you for so many years. And so again, on behalf of so many, and on behalf of our long-suffering Palestinian brothers and sisters, I want to thank you, and may Almighty God, who is known in many different languages and cultures around the world by many different names, may the Almighty bless and continue to fortify you for the struggle ahead. And if I'm not mistaken, before the broadcast started, I thought I heard the voice of Rabbi Feldman, and if I did, my salams to him as well.
Thank you.
That is Rabbi David Feldman. Okay, alhamdulillah.
Thank you. God bless.
You're welcome. God bless, brother.
Thank you.
All right. I want to close out with one of our Arabic prayers, a very short dua from the Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi kusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati. Wa tawassaw bil haqq. Wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in translation, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. May Allah bless the rest of your day. Please share this today's wonderful discussion with as many people as you possibly can. And Allah willing, we are going to have Rabbi Weiss and or one of the other leaders, rabbis of Neturei Karta with us again very soon for a follow-up on this very important conversation on the difference between Judaism and Zionism. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.